Hey, IELTS, I took it a couple days ago, and waiting for the results very patiently. And today I'm going to do an album review on one of my favorite albums of the decade. Again, I'm gonna focus more on reviewing good albums now. So, if you're wondering why am I giving so many positive reviews, it's because I want to do review on good albums more than bad albums because, like, I don't talk about them enough. Anyway, this is going to be my favorite jazz album of the decade, and it would be Kamasi Washington's The Epic. I have also done a review on the last Kamasi Washington album, Heaven and Earth, and also gave it a pretty positive score. But I think this one is better, way better. The Epic, by Kamasi Washington, a saxophonist, jazz musician, band leader, multi-instrumentalist, composer, worked with Flying Lotus, Thundercat, Kendrick Lamar, and apparently Lauryn Hill. And this is actually his debut effort, and it is 3 hours long. Yes, 3 hours long. And when albums are this long, they do require a lot of versatility and diversity, and fortunately, this album has those things. There are tracks on this album where it's just soft, dreamy, spacey, moody jazz, and then there are moments where it gets super cinematic, super orchestral, and grand and large in scale, and then there are the moments on the album where it's just wild, eccentric, frantic, and incredibly intense, and in between the very sweet and hypnotic jazz leads to the very crazy frenzy solos, this album is actually really solid and really cohesive. Also, there are many different genres of jazz sort of mixed into this album. Not only do we have the very slow and grand spiritual jazz, but also jazz fusion, vocal jazz, and funky, groovy jazz. Yeah. And then later on in the year 2018, last year, he also dropped Heaven and Earth, which is an even slower and quieter album, very cumbersome, but it's still very, very beautiful, and I love a majority of the tracks on that album. But back to this album, since it is 3 hours long, this is going to be a long review, so sit tight. But in short, I love this album. One of the best albums of the decade, again, and one of my favorite jazz albums ever. Um, this album is split into three parts. Part 1 is very grand and cinematic. Part 2 is pure fire. Every single track is just very intense, insane. It brings a lot of colors and flavors, blasting in all directions. And part 3 is very sweet, romantic, and very beautiful. So we have disc 1, starting off with the track Change of the Guard, and it's stunning. We get this very stellar piano line right off the bat. Dun 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 dun. And then we get the horns, the drums, the bass, the group vocals, and the strings. This album is not only Kamasi Washington, actually. It's more like Kamasi Washington's band. But to say that it's a band is an understatement, because like probably 30 people are involved in making the music on this album. The scale is just so large. On the opening track alone, all the instrumentals are just blasting at full force, locked and loaded, and it's just layers upon layers upon layers of very rich, grand instrumentals. It's super large in scale, and then of course we get these very beautiful glossy strings, the very intense twittery, skittery piano solos, and the ending, which is incredibly spacey and intergalactic, and it is just one really impressive opener. We have the second track, Ask Him, which is equally as large in scale, but maybe a little slower, maybe a little more low-key. The strings are a little bit more graceful, yet we get some drums, the percussion, which are raw. We even get some hand percussion, which adds on to the track a really nice layer of texture. We have the very slow build up towards the beginning, and then the rest of the track is incredibly relaxing and laid back. And then we have the third track, Isabelle, which is one of the milder and more cumbersome moments on the album. Very slow, kind of sleepy. We get some teary, sad organs, and also the instrumentals just playing on top of a bed of very subdued keyboards. Yes, this track is kind of mild, and this track feels like a deep cut track, so I'm not too particularly impressed with the track, even though I really like the sound palette here. But it's the next track that really started the fire that this album contains. The track is called Final Thought, and it hits really, really hard. We get some incredibly exciting harmonized saxophones and horns, and it just hits really hard. And the whole track, it's 6 minutes long, and it's relatively shorter than many other tracks on the album, because many other tracks on the album are like 9 minutes long, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and it's 6 minutes long, and it's just wild. It's a wild track. The shrill saxophone notes in the middle of the track, it just keeps on vibrating for like 1 minute straight, and it's so fiery. We have the track The Next Step, which starts off pretty spacey, pretty cinematic, not all that special or anything. It has some standard bass, jazz mixture at first, but the instrumentals, they swell, they ascend, and it just becomes more and more noisy, more and more grand in scale, and it just gradually becomes very cinematic and dramatic. And we even get these scattered instrumental solos, which sounds incredibly amazing, gives this track a grainy texture, and listening to this track sounds like being launched to space, like the album cover where Kamasi Washington is just in the center of like space with planets behind him. We have the track The Rhythm Changes, sort of wrapping up the first third of the album, and it's an incredibly beautiful vocal jazz track, which is very elegant. Yes, the singing can be a little campy, they can sound a little corny, but it's still sort of not a bad thing, because this is sort of a feature of most of the vocal jazz out there. B, the vocals aren't really the main thing of the track. Of course, the saxophones, the horns, they are really the main course of the track, but the vocals, they just pair up so well together to create this very relaxing and dreamy atmosphere, which I really love. The lyrics are powerful, they reach beyond existence and purpose, and it just sounds like the kind of song that would sort of happen at the end of like an old school Disney movie, where every single character just sings in unison and it's happily ever after, and it's just really beautiful. Over to the second part of the album, starting off with Misunderstanding, which has a pretty slow, spacey intro, and then it suddenly stops, and then it blasts. All the instrumentals blast at full force. It's fast, fiery, furious, and extremely intense. It's very, very stunning. It's just incredible how Kamasi Washington and his band just keeps up at this very wild pace. Also, the bass on this track, both Thundercat and the other guy, two bass players here, they murder this track. They completely murder this track. And then afterwards we have Leroy and Lanisha, which is slow, sweet, and again we get some really nice harmonized instrumentals, and this track sounds like sort of a song from a musical. And this track is also very warm. It sounds like a really nice warm morning with a bit of a nostalgic edge to the track, which is incredibly beautiful. And afterwards we have Rerun, another really fiery track, except this time we get some funky bass grooves, which is a really nice touch. Also some really tight hand drums. We also get some harmonized saxophones on this track as well. And in comparison to other harmonized saxophone parts on the album, this one is a little more loose, but the ending of the track is just incredibly raw and primal, and it's friggin' amazing as well. And then afterwards, we have another really slow track called Seven Prayers, which is a bit of a slow down point in the middle of the album. It's incredibly soft and fluid. We get some horns, which are really tender, and they sort of act as the main driving force of the track, while other instrumentals just float around. But yeah, while this track is kind of mild, it still sounds really hypnotic and in a great way. And then we have the track Henrietta, Our Hero, another vocal jazz track with more flavors, and again, it's incredibly romantic and sweet of a track. And part 2 ends with The Magnificent Seven, which is it's insane. This track is pure insanity. I completely didn't expect Kamasi, Washington, and the rest of the band to go this hard. They went super hard on this track. Just insane, fiery jazz solos, very intense rhythm instrumentals, just screaming, screeching saxophones, chorus vocals on top of their lungs, crazy psychedelic bass solo, these sharp strings just going spasm. This track is incredible, and it's jazz in its very, very intense, insane, fiery state, and it's just stunning in every single moment. And then we have the third part of the album, starting off with the track Rerun Home, which is sort of an extension of the track Rerun, except it's wilder, rawer. It has some really nice eccentric dueling horns, and also these very just crispy sounding, just crunchy, nutty drums, which I really love. And even though this track is an extension of the 8-minute long Rerun, this track is 14 minutes long. So both parts of the Rerun add together to be 22 minutes long. Yes, very long, but kind of worth it. We have the track Cherokee, which is another vocal jazz track, except it's more relaxing and laid back than any other vocal jazz tracks on the album. I really love the Tootsie horns, which is a really cute touch, and it's a really relaxing song overall. But what really steals the show on the third part is the track Clair de Lune, a remake of a very iconic track by Debussy. Not iconic track. The right word would be iconic piece. And boy, this track is very beautiful, very romantic and tears-inducing, and also incredibly dreamy. And it just puts you in such a sleepy, a dreamy state while you are fully awake, so that you are aware of the beauty around you. And that's just an incredibly gorgeous and an elegant and elegantly existential moment on the entire project. And we have the track Malcolm's Theme, which is also another vocal jazz track, a tribute song to Malcolm X. The instrumentals here, they are incredibly layered, they are dense, but the vocals, they are very faithful, they're very solemn, and it's paired with some really beautiful, expressive instrumentals underneath, and it's just such a great pairing. And also towards the end, we have a vocal clip of Malcolm X talking. But the album really ends off with the track The Message, which is surprisingly not a slow whisper of an ending. It's actually a pretty fiery ending as well. Not as insane as Misunderstanding or The Magnificent Seven, but it's still a really peppy, fun ending to the album. We get some raw, cranky drums, some really nice, freaky pianos. The saxophones sort of take a step backwards, but all the other instrumentals here, they just do their own thing, and it's just a pretty great ending to the album. So yeah, overall, I love this album a lot. So many different instrumental palettes while still remaining jazzy. And yeah, it's an incredible album. It really lives up to its title, and it's a very important bookmark in just jazz music in the 2010s in general, because this album is so ambitious yet so great. My favorite track here is The Magnificent Seven, and my least favorite is Isabelle. I am giving Kamasi Washington's The Epic a 9 out of 10. So, have you listened to Kamasi Washington The Epic? From 1 to 10, how much did you rate it? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. Also, I will do the Coldplay album review tomorrow, so be patient. But I'll drop it tomorrow. And yeah,